The stars had been mapped for 10,000 years. Every corner of the galaxy had been explored, catalogued, and claimed. The Galactic conquered, an alliance of 47 spacefaring species, governed from the shining stations of the Nexus core. They believed they knew everything worth knowing about the universe. They were wrong. Ambassador of the hegemony sat in a cultural exchange hall, her four eyes half closed with boredom. The event was meant to build unity among the younger generation, but she found little interest in the proceedings. Younglings from a dozen species gathered in circles, sharing stories from there. Most were simple tales about nature spirits or ancient heroes. Then a young began speaking, and found herself listening. On the edge of the galaxy, the youngling said, his voice dropping to a whisper, there is a world of death. The air itself burns the lungs of any who breathe it. The water dissolves flesh and bone. The star above bathes everything in killing radiation. The other younglings leaned closer, even straightened in her seat. And on this world, they continued, there live monsters. They walk on two legs like us, but they are not like us. They evolved as hunters. They chase their prey across endless distances, never stopping, never resting until their victims collapse from exhaustion. They call this persistence hunting. A small child raised her hand. Nothing can survive such a world. You are making this up. The shook his head. The Terrans are real. My grandfather's grandfather spoke of them. They drink a liquid that kills all other life. They consume the flesh of other creatures. Their bodies are filled with tiny organisms that live inside them, and instead of dying from this infection, they need these creatures to survive. Felt a chill run through her crystalline form. She had heard whispers of this myth before in dark corners of space stations and in the muttered warnings of old travelers. The Terrans, the humans, when they are injured, they said, their bodies repair themselves. Broken bones knit back together. Torn flesh grows new skin. They can lose limbs and continue fighting. They domesticated wolves, one of the deadliest predators on their world, and turned them into companions. They split the atom. They walked on their own moon before they even discovered faster-than-light travel. An elder scientist from the collective of minds laughed softly. He was old, his synthetic body showing signs of wear, and his voice carried the weight of authority. Children, please. This is a wonderful story, but nothing more. I have studied planetary formation for 300 years. A Class 12 cannot produce intelligent life. The radiation alone would destroy any developing nervous system. The youngling lowered his eyes. My grandfather believed. Your grandfather was a romantic, the scientist said kindly. The Terran myth is exactly that, a myth. It is a collection of our deepest fears given form, a warning tale about the dangers of the universe. But it is not real. It cannot be real. The gathering moved on to other stories. The younglings forgot about the Terrans and laughed at lighter tales, but did not forget. She sat in silence, thinking about worlds of poison and fire, about creatures who hunted without rest, about monsters who healed from wounds that would kill anyone else. That night she searched the Concord's historical archives. She found thousands of references to the Terran myth, scattered across hundreds of cultures. Every species had some version of the story. The details changed, but the core remained the same. Somewhere out there in the unexplored reaches of the galaxy, there existed a species forged in hell. She found artistic representations of these mythical creatures. They were shown as tall and thin, with forward-facing eyes like predators. Their skin came in various shades, their hair in different colors. In some images, they were shown screaming in battle. In others, they held strange weapons that shot fire and metal. In one particularly disturbing painting, a Terran was shown smiling while covered in blood. Closed the archives and went to bed. She told herself the scientist was right. The Terrans were just a story, nothing more. Far away, in the darkest reaches of charted space, something was happening that would change everything. The devouring swarm had been consuming civilizations for longer than recorded history. They were a collective intelligence, billions of creatures acting as one mind. Their ships were alive, grown from organic matter, capable of healing and adapting to any threat. They moved through the galaxy like a plague, stripping worlds of all resources, adding the genetic material of conquered species to their own. In 10,000 years, they had destroyed 17 civilizations. The conquered had fought them to a standstill centuries ago, establishing borders that neither side crossed. It was an uneasy peace, but it was peace. Now the swarm was moving again. A conquered observation post detected the change first. Millions of swarm vessels were shifting course, pulling back from the border, moving deeper into their own territory. The analysts were confused. This was not attack behavior. This was not defense behavior either. Then they realized the truth. The swarm was running away from something. The greatest predator the galaxy had ever known, the destroyer of civilizations, the consumer of worlds, was fleeing in terror. Something had scared the swarm so badly that they abandoned positions they had held for centuries. The conquered sent probes into the region the swarm had fled. Most were destroyed by residual swarm forces, but one made it through, and what it sent back made no sense at all. There were ships in that region, ships of metal and fire, of designs that matched no known species. They were small, primitive compared to conquered technology, but they were there. They were real. And they were coming. The Conquered's Council of Species called an emergency session. Scientists argued about the data. Military leaders demanded action. Politicians worried about public panic. No one knew what to do. Sat in the gallery, watching the chaos below. She thought about the story the youngling had told. She thought about persistent hunters who never stopped, never rested until their prey collapsed. She thought about monsters from a world of poison and fire. And for the first time in her long life, Ambassador of the Hegemony felt truly afraid. The Terrans were coming, and nobody was ready. The frontier burned. Colony after colony fell silent as the devouring swarm pushed deeper into conquered territory. Whatever had scared them in the outer regions had also made them desperate, and desperate enemies were the most dangerous kind. Watched the reports come in from her office on Nexus Station. 12 worlds had gone dark in the past month. The fleet was stretched thin, trying to protect evacuation routes while slowing the swarm's advance. It was not working. The council met every day now, but the meetings produced nothing but arguments. Some called for a full military response. Others argued for negotiation, though everyone knew the swarm did not negotiate. A few whispered about surrender, about offering tribute worlds to buy time. Nobody spoke of hope. There was no hope left to speak of. Then the strange ship appeared. It came from the direction of the unexplored regions, limping through space on damaged engines. Its design was unlike anything in the galactic database. Metal hull, chemical propulsion systems, primitive sensor arrays. It looked like something from ancient history, from before the discovery of faster-than-light travel. The ship broadcast a simple message: mathematical primes, 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, the universal signal for intelligent life-seeking contact. A conquered patrol vessel intercepted the strange craft. When the boarding team cut through the airlock, they found something impossible inside. There were 5 of them. Bipedal creatures with soft skin and forward-facing eyes. They wore suits of fabric and metal, and they carried tools that looked like primitive weapons. They were injured, exhausted, and clearly terrified. They were Terrans, they were real. The news spread through the Conquered like wildfire. Within hours, every species knew that the myth had become reality. They existed. They had found the galaxy at last. Was sent to make first contact. She arrived at the medical station where the Terrans were being held. Held was perhaps the wrong word. The doctors were too afraid to touch them, and the security forces kept their distance. The Terrans sat in a sealed room, watching their captors with those predator eyes. Entered the room alone. It was the bravest thing she had ever done. The leader of the Terrans rose to greet her. She was a female of the species, with dark hair and brown skin. Her name, would later learn, was Captain of the United Earthship. "Thank you for rescuing us," said. Her voice was strange, produced by vibrating flesh in her throat. "We have been lost for 18 months. Our navigation systems failed, and we have been trying to find our way home." Struggled to process the information. The translator device rendered the Terran language into something she could understand, but the words themselves made little sense. Lost. How could a species capable of building starships become lost? "Where is your home?" asked. Gestured to one of her crew, who produced a small device. It projected a map of the galaxy, crude but recognizable. The Terran pointed to a small yellow star in an unremarkable region of space. "That is Sol," said. "That is where Earth is, that is home." Knew that star. It had been surveyed centuries ago and dismissed as uninteresting. The third planet from that star had been classified as uninhabitable. Too much radiation, atmosphere too corrosive, gravity too strong. No intelligent life could evolve there. The survey had been wrong. Over the following days, learned more about the Terrans than she had ever wanted to know. Each new fact was more disturbing than the last. They breathed oxygen, a gas so reactive that it could cause fires and explosions. Their bodies required a constant supply of this poison to survive. They drank water, a substance that dissolved almost everything it touched. They needed to consume several liters of this universal solvent every day. Their blood contained iron, a metal that rusted when exposed to their atmosphere. This iron carried oxygen through their bodies, feeding their cells. They consumed the flesh of other creatures for energy. They cooked this flesh over open flames before eating it. Sometimes they did not cook it at all. Their bodies hosted trillions of microorganisms, bacteria that lived in their digestive systems, on their skin, in their mouths. These creatures were not parasites. The Terrans needed them to survive. They had evolved together. When one of the Terran crew members broke his arm during a medical examination, watched in horror as the doctors tried to help. The Terran refused sedation, saying the pain was manageable. He let the doctors set the bone, grinding the broken ends together, and barely flinched. Within weeks, his body would repair the damage completely. The Terrans could run for hours without stopping. They could survive wounds that would kill any other species. They could function without sleep for days when necessary. They could adapt to almost any environment. They were everything the myths had said, and more. But the most disturbing thing about the Terrans was not their physical abilities. It was their psychology. They formed bonds with other creatures. They kept predators as companions. They felt loyalty to strangers. They risked their lives for beings they had never met. Captain spoke of Earth's history, of wars and disasters and near-extinction events. Her species had survived ice ages and plagues and weapons that could destroy cities in a single blast. They had fought each other for thousands of years before learning to work together. "We are not perfect," admitted. "We have done terrible things, but we learned. Every time we fell, we got back up. We are still learning." Asked the question that burned in her mind. "The swarm, the enemy that is destroying our worlds, they fled from your region of space. What happened?" His expression changed. Her eyes hardened and for a moment saw the predator that lurked beneath the surface. "They came to our colonies," said. "They destroyed 3 of our worlds before we understood what we were facing. Then we fought back." How the swarm adapts to every weapon. They cannot be defeated. Smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "We are very good at war," she said. "We have had a lot of practice." The council demanded an audience with the Terrans. They wanted to know if humanity could save them from the swarm. They wanted to know if they would fight for strangers. watched as Captain addressed the gathered representatives of 47 species. The small Terran stood before the most powerful beings in the galaxy and showed no fear. "We have ships," said. "We have weapons. We have soldiers who will fight until their last breath. But I cannot promise you anything. I must return to Earth and speak with our government." "Will they help us?" someone called from the assembly. Was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried through the hall. "I do not know," she said. "We owe you nothing. You never knew we existed. You thought we were monsters from a nightmare." She paused. "But we have spent 10,000 years looking at the stars and asking if we were alone. Now we know the answer. There are others out there, others who need help." She looked around the assembly, meeting hundreds of alien eyes. "Humans do not abandon those who need us," she said. "It is not in our nature. I believe we will come. I believe we will fight, but I cannot promise you that." She left the hall, and the conquered began to hope for the first time in months. The ghost was real. The myth was flesh and blood, and somewhere in the darkness of space, humanity was making a choice that would change the galaxy forever. The delegation ship approached the yellow star called Sol, and every being aboard felt a deep unease. They were about to visit the mythical. They were about to see the place that had forged the impossible Terrans. Stood at the observation window as Earth came into view. The planet was beautiful in a terrifying way. Blue oceans of that universal solvent covered most of the surface. White clouds swirled in patterns that suggested massive atmospheric disturbances. Green and brown landmasses showed where life had somehow taken hold. The ship descended through the atmosphere and understood why the Terrans were what they were. Lightning flashed in the clouds around them. The ship shook from turbulent winds. Below, she could see a massive storm system spinning over one of the oceans, large enough to swallow a small moon. The Terrans called these hurricanes. They happened regularly. The ship landed in a city called Geneva, at a place the Terrans called the United Earth Headquarters. Representatives from the conquered stepped onto Earth's surface for the first time in history. The gravity was crushing, felt like she weighed twice as much as normal. The Terrans walked easily, their powerful bodies adapted to this constant strain. No wonder they were so strong. They had evolved under this relentless pull. The air smelled strange, rich and complex, filled with organic compounds. Every breath brought new sensations. The Terrans breathed this toxic mixture without thought, their bodies processing the corrosive oxygen with ease. The Terrans had prepared a welcome ceremony. Thousands of them lined the streets, watching the alien visitors with curious eyes. They did not show fear. They did not show aggression. They showed interest, as if meeting beings from across the galaxy was simply another new experience to be enjoyed. A female Terran approached the delegation. She introduced herself as Secretary General, the leader of Earth's government. She was tall and dark-skinned, with gray hair that suggested age, though she moved with the easy grace of a predator. "Welcome to Earth," said. "We have waited a long time for this moment." The delegation spent 3 days on Earth, and every hour brought new horrors. They visited a hospital and watched Terran doctors perform surgery. The patients were cut open with sharp instruments, their organs exposed and manipulated, and then sewn back together. The patients survived this butchery. Some of them were awake during the procedures, having been given only partial sedation. They visited a gymnasium and watched Terrans exercise. The beings lifted heavy weights, ran on machines, struck each other in controlled combat. They pushed their bodies to exhaustion for entertainment. They called this fun. They visited a natural preserve and saw Earth's wildlife. Predators with teeth and claws roamed free. Venomous creatures hid in the underbrush. Even the plants were dangerous, some of them producing poisons, others covered in sharp thorns. The Terrans walked among these threats without concern. They watched a Terran consume something called a chili pepper, a plant that caused pain when eaten. The Terran smiled and asked for more. He enjoyed the pain. He sought it out deliberately. They learned that Terrans kept wolves as pets. The descendants of apex predators lived in Terran homes, slept in their beds, and protected their children. The Terrans had taken one of the most dangerous creatures on their world and made it love them. Began to understand. The Terrans were not monsters. They were survivors. Everything about them, their strength, their endurance, their tolerance for pain, their bond-forming nature, all of it was adaptation. They had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every day, and they had refused to die. On the second day, Secretary General invited the delegation to witness a session of Earth's governing council. The Terrans called it the Assembly. The room was full of shouting. Terrans from different regions of their world argued loudly about whether to help the conquered. Some demanded immediate action. Others warned about the costs of war. A few suggested that the conquered's problems were not humanity's concern. The delegation watched in confusion. Where they came from, governments made decisions through careful consensus. The idea of elected leaders screaming at each other seemed primitive and chaotic. But notice something else. Despite the shouting, despite the disagreements, no one reached for a weapon. No one threatened violence. The Terrans had channeled their aggressive nature into debate. They fought with words instead of claws. It was still terrifying to watch. A familiar figure rose to speak. Captain, now wearing a formal uniform, addressed the assembly. The shouting stopped. Everyone listened. "I have seen what the swarm does," said. "I have seen the worlds they destroy, the species they consume. They will not stop with the conquered. Eventually they will come for us. We can fight them now, alongside allies, or we can fight them later alone." A politician from a region called Brazil stood up. "We have 60 billion people on Earth in our colonies. The conquered has trillions. Let them fight their own battles." Shook her head. "That is not who we are. We have spent our entire history dreaming of meeting other intelligent life. Now we have, and they need our help. Are we going to turn our backs on them because it is difficult, because it is dangerous?" She looked around the assembly, her predator eyes meeting human eyes. "We are humanity," she said. "We do not abandon those who need us. It is not in our nature. Our ancestors crossed oceans in wooden ships. They climbed mountains because they were there. They walked on the moon because someone said it could not be done. We are the species that looks at the impossible and says, 'Watch me.'" The assembly voted. The debate lasted for hours. When it was finished, the result was close but clear. Humanity would go to war. Secretary General met with the conquered delegation that night. She looked tired but determined. "We have 47 warships," she said. "That is all we can spare while defending our own territory. We have soldiers, Marines trained for ship-to-ship combat. We have weapons that the swarm has never seen." Felt hope but also concern. 47 ships against the swarm. They have millions of vessels. Smiled. It was the same smile had shown, the smile of a predator about to hunt. "Quality matters more than quantity," she said. "And your people will learn something about human soldiers that the swarm has never understood." "What is that?" "We do not know how to give up," said. "We do not know how to stop fighting. You can break our bodies. You can destroy our ships. You can kill us by the thousands. But as long as one human draws breath, we will keep coming. We will never stop." She leaned forward and saw 10,000 years of survival in her eyes. "The swarm thinks it is the ultimate predator," said. "They are about to learn that they have never faced anything like us. They think they know what persistence means. They have no idea." The delegation returned to conquered space with news that spread across 1,000 worlds. They were coming. The myth was marching to war. For the first time in months, the galaxy dared to hope. Gate was the last line of defense before the conquered's core worlds. If the swarm broke through here, billions would die. The combined fleet of 30 species gathered at this point in space. 2,000 warships representing every fighting force the conquered could muster. And among them, like wolves among sheep, sat 47 human vessels. Had transferred to the command station to observe the battle. She watched the human ships take their positions, their metal hulls gleaming against the darkness of space. They were smaller than most conquered vessels, but there was something dangerous about their design. They looked like weapons. Admiral Wei commanded the human fleet from the bridge of the UES Terra's Fury. He was an older male with gray hair and calm eyes. He had fought in 3 wars on Earth before the conquered even knew humanity existed. When he spoke, other commanders listened. "The swarm will arrive in 6 hours," said during the final briefing. "They outnumber us 10 to 1, maybe more. Conquered doctrine says we should fight a defensive retreat, preserve our forces, buy time for evacuation." The alien admirals nodded. This was standard practice. Survival was always the priority. Shook his head. "That is not how humans fight. We will advance into the enemy. We will hit them so hard and so fast that they will not have time to adapt. We will make them bleed for every meter of space they try to take." A commander raised a concern. "Your ships are fewer in number. You will suffer heavy losses." "Yes," said simply, "we will. That is the price we are willing to pay." The human ships moved to the front of the formation. They would be the first to engage the enemy. They would take the heaviest losses, and they did not hesitate. The swarm arrived like a plague. Millions of biological ships emerged from faster-than-light travel, their organic hulls pulsing with terrible life. They were beautiful in a horrifying way, living vessels that could heal damage, adapt to weapons, and reproduce. Each ship carried thousands of warrior creatures, mindless soldiers controlled by the swarm's collective intelligence. The conquered fleet opened fire. Energy weapons and missiles struck the enemy formation, destroying thousands of swarm ships, but more came, always more. For every ship destroyed, 10 more took its place. The conquered admirals began ordering the retreat. Their doctrine demanded it. Survival was paramount. The humans ignored the order. They advanced. The UES Terra's Fury led the charge, its weapons firing continuously. Human ships carved a path through the swarm formation, taking damage, losing shields, but never stopping. They fought like they had nothing to lose. Because they understood something the swarm did not. Sometimes, the only way to win was to be willing to die. The UES Thermopylae, a smaller vessel named after an ancient human battle, took critical damage early in the fight. Its engines failed. Its weapons went offline. The ship was dead in space, surrounded by swarm vessels moving in to consume it. Captain had a choice. He could surrender and hope for capture. He could try to evacuate his crew, or he could fight. He ordered all hands to abandon ship. Then, with a skeleton crew of volunteers, he piloted the dying vessel into the heart of a swarm carrier. At the last moment, he detonated the ship's reactor core. The explosion destroyed the carrier and 17 swarm vessels around it. Captain and his volunteers died instantly. They died smiling. The swarm had never seen anything like this. Their genetic memory stretched back millions of years, and they had never encountered a species willing to destroy itself to destroy them. They did not understand sacrifice. They could not process an enemy that saw death as an acceptable cost. The human Marines were even more terrifying. Boarding parties launched from human ships, small craft carrying soldiers in armored suits. They cut their way into swarm hive ships, fighting hand-to-hand through corridors filled with warrior creatures. Sergeant Maria Santos led a team of 12 Marines into the nerve center of a swarm command vessel. They fought for 3 hours, killing hundreds of swarm warriors. When their ammunition ran out, they fought with knives. When their knives broke, they fought with their hands. Santos lost 8 of her Marines reaching the nerve center. The 4 survivors did not have enough explosives to destroy the massive biological computer that controlled the ship. so they set it on fire. They held the corridors while the nerve center burned, fighting off wave after wave of swarm warriors. They sang songs as they fought, old human war songs that their ancestors had sung in battles across Earth. They sang about courage and death and never giving up. Two of them survived long enough to be rescued. They were still singing when the medics pulled them from the wreckage. The swarm began to retreat. It was not a tactical withdrawal. It was not a strategic repositioning. It was fear, pure primal fear. The swarm had conquered 17 civilizations. They had devoured worlds. They had faced every weapon the galaxy could create, but they had never faced humans. They had never faced an enemy that smiled while dying. They had never faced soldiers who considered death a victory if it meant taking enemies with them. They had never faced a species that treated war as something personal. The swarm's collective intelligence tried to adapt, but there was nothing to adapt to. Human psychology was not a weapon that could be countered. It was not a technology that could be. It was something deeper, something built into the very nature of the species. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters. They chased prey across endless distances, never stopping, never resting, until their victims collapsed from exhaustion. Now they hunted the swarm with that same relentless determination. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the swarm had lost nearly a third of its fleet. They fled into the darkness between stars, running from the monsters they had awakened. The cost was high. 31 human ships were destroyed. Nearly 20,000 human soldiers died at its gate. The conquered lost hundreds of vessels and millions of lives. But they had won. Watch the surviving human ships regroup after the battle. They were damaged, some barely holding together, but they were already planning the next move. They did not rest. They did not celebrate. They mourned their dead, honored their fallen, and immediately began preparing to pursue the enemy. Admiral appeared on the communication screens, his face tired but determined. "The swarm is broken but not destroyed," he said. "They will run, they will hide, they will try to rebuild. We cannot allow that. We must pursue them. We must hunt them until they can never threaten anyone again." A conquered admiral asked the question everyone was thinking. "You have lost more than half your fleet. Your people have paid a terrible price. Why do you keep fighting?" Was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "Because we remember," he said. "Every soldier who died today will be remembered. Their names will be carved in stone on earth. Their children will know what they sacrificed, and we will be worthy of that sacrifice." He looked at the stars, at the distant region where the swarm was fleeing. "We did not come here to survive," said. "We came here to win, and we will not stop until the job is done. That is who we are. That is what it means to be human." The hunt began. The war lasted 18 months. The human fleet led a coalition force deep into swarm territory, pursuing the enemy across hundreds of light years. They did not wait for the swarm to rebuild. They did not give them time to adapt. They hunted without rest, without mercy, without stopping. World after world fell. The swarm tried to flee, tried to hide, tried to scatter into the darkness between galaxies. It did not matter. The humans tracked them everywhere. The species that had evolved as persistence hunters showed the galaxy what that truly meant. Accompanied the coalition fleet as an observer. She watched the humans fight battle after battle, always outnumbered, always winning. She watched them mourn their dead and then immediately return to the fight. She watched them refuse to accept anything less than total victory. She watched them change the galaxy. The conquered had spent 10,000 years avoiding conflict, prioritizing survival above all else. The humans taught them something different. They taught them that some things were worth dying for. They taught them that survival without purpose was not living. Young aliens from 100 species began volunteering to serve alongside human soldiers. They learned human tactics, human songs, human ways of thinking. They learned that fear was not weakness, that courage was not the absence of fear but the decision to act despite it. The final battle took place at the swarm's home system, a cluster of dying stars where the collective intelligence had first evolved millions of years ago. The coalition fleet surrounded the system and closed in. The swarm made its last stand. They threw everything they had at the attacking fleet. Millions of ships, billions of warriors, the accumulated strength of 1,000,000 years of evolution. It was not enough. Admiral died in the final assault, his ship destroyed while leading the charge into the swarm's core. His last transmission was calm, almost peaceful. "Tell my family I love them," he said. "Tell Earth we did our job." The coalition forces destroyed the swarm's central intelligence. Without the guiding mind, the individual creatures lost their coordination. The great collective that had terrorized the galaxy for longer than recorded history collapsed into chaos. The war was over. The galaxy was safe. Nearly 1,000,000 human soldiers died in the 18 months of fighting. 12 of the original 47 ships survived. Earth mourned losses that would take generations to recover from. But they had won. The myth had become legend, and the legend had saved a galaxy. 5 years after the war, returned to Earth for a ceremony. She was old now, her crystalline body showing the marks of age, but she would not miss this event for anything. A memorial had been built on a hillside overlooking the sea. It was a simple structure, a wall of black stone carved with names. Nearly 1,000,000 names, each one representing a human who had died fighting for strangers. Aliens came from across the galaxy to see it. They walked slowly past the wall, reading the names, trying to understand the magnitude of the sacrifice. Some left offerings, some wept, some simply stood in silence, overwhelmed by what they were witnessing. Found the name she was looking for. Carlos, captain of the UES Thermopylae. The man who had driven his dying ship into the heart of a swarm carrier because he believed his death could mean something. She did not know how to honor such a sacrifice. Her culture had no framework for understanding it, so she simply stood there, her 4 eyes closed, and tried to remember. A young child approached the memorial with her mother. The little one looked at the endless rows of names and asked a question that had been trying to answer for 5 years. Why did they fight for us? They did not know us. We thought they were monsters. Why did they die for strangers? The mother did not have an answer. She looked at, hoping the old ambassador might know. Thought about everything she had learned about humans, their persistence, their pack-bonding nature, their strange combination of violence and compassion, their refusal to accept defeat. Because they never stopped believing that tomorrow could be better than today, she said finally, and they were willing to die for it. She looked at the names on the wall, at the memorial to a species that had emerged from myth to save a galaxy. That is what it means to be human, she said. They look at the impossible and say, "Watch me." Far above, human and alien ships patrolled together. The galaxy was no longer afraid of what lurked in the darkness. The swarm was gone. Other threats would come, as they always did, but the galaxy was no longer alone. Humanity had joined the Galactic Concord as a full member. Their technology, their medicine, their strange philosophy of determination spread across 1,000 worlds. Young aliens studied human history, human art, human music. They learned about the wars and the disasters and the near-extinction events. They learned how humanity had fallen 100 times and gotten back up every single time. They learned that the monsters from they were not monsters at all. They were guardians. They were protectors. They were the species that had looked at the stars and asked if they were alone, and when they found others in need, they had not hesitated to help. The old stories changed. The tales of Terrans that parents told their children were no longer warnings. They were stories of hope, Stories about impossible creatures from a world of fire and poison who had come to save strangers because it was the right thing to do. Lived long enough to see the first generation of children who had grown up knowing humanity. They did not fear they admired them. They wanted to be like them. She died peacefully, surrounded by friends from a dozen species, including several humans. Her last words were a question she had been pondering since the day Captain had first shaken her hand. Was it worth it, she asked. The million who died, was it worth the price? A human soldier, young and strong, with the predator eyes that had learned to see as kind rather than threatening, took her hand. They would say yes, the soldier said. Every single one of them, because they died for something that mattered. They died protecting people who needed help. They died making the galaxy a better place. The soldier smiled, and it was not the smile of a predator. It was the smile of a guardian. That is the only death worth having, the soldier said. That is the only way to live. Closed her 4 eyes for the last time, she understood now. The humans were not monsters, they never had been. They were the best of what intelligent life could become, strong enough to fight, wise enough to know when to fight, brave enough to die for strangers. They were humanity. And the galaxy would never forget them. On the memorial wall, below the million names, an inscription had been carved. It was in every language known to the conquered, and in the original human tongue as well. They were afraid of the dark, so they became the light. The galaxy remembered, the galaxy honored, and somewhere in the stars the children of Earth stood watch, ready to face whatever came next. Because that was who they were. That was what it meant to be human.